Thank you. The slide that you see is Advent Energy. There are two principal investments in BPH Energy. That is Advent and Cortical. We have an approximate 20% interest in both of those companies, and further details on the ASX announcements that we've got. We have been some of the most actively traded smaller stocks on the ASX, and over 70% of our company's issued capital has turned over in a period of less than a week. And that's all because of two factors. One's the advances in Cortical, but very much the focus is on the potential drilling of the offshore Sydney Basin project at Baleen. The map really just shows that we're in proven petroleum basins, both in our Northern Territory area and in the offshore Sydney Basin. The thing that I'd like you to just look at is to see going from the Bowen Surrey right through to Sydney Basin, and you then understand the way in which these basins are put together. We have the capacity to move into carbon capture and storage, or more particular, the storage component of the carbon. The offshore Sydney Basin is recognised as a potential carbon storage area, and that would have a significant input, if proven, for the carbon reduction and the objectives of both New South Wales and federal governments. And of course, that's what we will also focus on in terms of both gas and carbon storage potential in the offshore when we go to drill. We're waiting currently for NOPTA to approve an extension on the permit. Next slide, please. If you look here, you'll see the black line. Really, it starts at Newcastle and goes to Sydney, and that shows the extent of the permit coverage. You're really looking here in the yellow and at the buried mountain, as I call it, the analog or the analogy to what we're looking at. So that's really the target zones, 2,000 metres plus subsea floor. The other aspect of this map or graphic shows right out to the continental shelf, and you see the continental shelf slump events, and I'll come through to those, but I'll just bring those to your attention. The real issue here is that there is a shortage of gas supply forecast, and in particular it's gas at an affordable price, and we're ideally situated here because the Baleen drill target is just 27 kilometres from the Munmora gas pipeline, and I'll come through to that shortly. Next slide, please. This really shows the proximity to that Munmora gas pipeline and the trunk line which runs from Sydney through to Newcastle. And of course, Newcastle is where there is significant demand for gas in the industrial users there. But really, the other key facet here is that the Snowy Hydro has announced plans for a gas-fired power station, and the New South Wales government has also announced that pumped hydro, batteries and gas are a key component of their next stage of energy, and we have a potential source here for that gas into the energy grid, as well as for the industrial users. We really show here the Colungra power plant precinct, but we could equally run a pipeline up into Newcastle. Next slide, please. All that this shows is that you have groups that have researched or looked at this area, including Santos, Amperex, going back to 1991 and 92. And Santos identified 10 leads, and Amperex identified the Baleen lead as one of their major targets, with a 1.5 TCF perspective. So we've got multiple sets of seismic, and I'll come through to a coverage of that. Next slide, please. What we have is hydrocarbon potential proven repeatedly across different facets of the work that's been done here in the basin, proven by industry standards. So that includes gas chimneys, HRDZs, AVO and reverse polarity and flat spots. So they're all key independent verifications of what we're looking at. And that's on multiple lines, B4, 15, 16, 17 and 18, where we plan to drill with our joint venture partner, Bounty. Advent has 85% of this permit offshore Sydney. Next slide, please. So the blue line here shows the 2011. I showed you earlier, the current permit boundary. Our zones that we're looking at here are 22 to 27 kilometres, if you will, offshore from Munmora, and about 30 kilometres south of Newcastle. You see there where the gas pipeline runs into both Munmora and into Newcastle. Essentially, we've done a 2D drilling survey, pre-drill survey over the top of Baleen in the recent past, and that set us up to move straight through into a drill program once we receive the NOPTA approval. Next slide, please. The analogues that are shown here on this slide are really to other areas around the world, including Australia, of course. And I show you the Ormen Lange gas field offshore Norway. The illustration here is to show shelf slump events and pockmark fields adjacent to or above the Ormen Lange gas field, but the same events occur over Gorgon and the same events occur over offshore Sydney. Next slide, please. This shows you sideways on into an illustration of a graphic illustrating in the Gulf of Mexico. And really the point here is just you're looking at the deeper reservoirs. When those reservoirs fill to spill, then you get gas chimneys. When those shallower reservoirs fill to spill, then in fact you get pockmarks at the surface. And that's what is shown in the offshore Sydney Basin. And there was a major government research program run in 2006, and that's where we got a lot of the data. Next slide, please. And you'll see that here. And if you can just keep on clicking on that slide, because there's a number of other features that show up here. These are some of the features that came from the research that was done by the government, and they correlated multiple sites right the way through from south of Sydney right the way through to north of Newcastle, where gas was seen seeping from the sea floor, and even to the south of Newcastle, a seafloor mud volcano there. And you're looking sideways on at the seafloor and down from there. Next slide, please. So we have here AVOs that have been interpreted across the entirety of this structural target at Baleen running through to South Fish. And this shows you just how much technical work has been done. Next slide, please. Here we're showing an analysis done by Fugro, and what they did was to say at a 2,000 metre you have this element of AVO, and you can see there the structural target. Next slide, please. CSRI did work and showed multiple simultaneous amplitude, reflection strength and other AVO anomalies. Next slide, please. And those are concurrent with seafloor seeps to the surface. Next slide, please. And this really shows the seismic line 18 where we plan to drill. Next slide, please. And I'll finish at that point. Oh, no, I won't finish. We've sampled the sea floor. Next slide, please. And when we sampled the sea floor, we had thermogenic source, and they were verified by independent analysis. Next slide, please. And again, that shows the thermogenic source. Next slide, please. And here you see the Surrey Bowen Permian Triassic going right through down into the Sydney Basin. Next slide, please. And here is the drill target that we're looking at with a 6,000 acres of amplitude closure. And I think that just neatly uses up my time if I'm right. And that's the drill target there on B418. And perhaps just one more slide at the moment. Thank you. So we've got a proven petroleum basin in the Sydney Basin. In fact, the technical success rate there for finding gas is well over the 50% level. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We've got an extraordinary level of interest here in terms of questions being asked, probably the highest we've ever had. The first question is around PEP 11 approval timeframe. Can you give our viewers an update on that, please?
We've been through this process before where it's taken over 12 months for a NOPTA approval process. NOPTA have on their website a timeframe. The recommendation on the extension was given some months ago, and we're currently waiting for that approval process. It's just not appropriate to give a time frame on the approval, but the permit runs through until that occurs, and we've applied under two different sections, if you will, or two different phases of extension approval for a further 2 years to enable the drilling to occur.
And that's a process that's managed by the New South Wales government, is it?
No, it's not the New South Wales government. It's called the Joint Authority, and the Joint Authority is the New South Wales relevant minister and the federal relevant minister. There was an interview on ABC radio this morning of Senator Pitt talking on ABC, and that's a good one to listen to if you want to be able to understand the process there. But in the net result, the legislation gives the final authority to the federal minister.
And there's a question here from a well-known analyst. The Sydney Basin has often been characterised by low porosity reservoirs. Is it likely to be different and better offshore?
So all of the research by Geoscience Australia and the New South Wales Government Department of Resources and other companies have all been of the same viewpoint. That is that the offshore Sydney Basin is likely to contain rock zones that are much higher in permeability and porosity than the onshore basin. And if you look at Norway is a good example. How many oil wells or gas wells do you see onshore Norway? 0. How many do you see offshore as close as 20 or 30 or 50 kilometres? A lot. Look down at the Gippsland Basin and you see all of the gas wells are in the offshore zones. And now that's not geological proof, but in reality, it's the reports by others on, and that's independent reports that show that permeability and porosity is likely to be there.
And David, we'll just finish on this, but the majority of the questions here are around this, these permits and these approvals, and I know we touched on it, but do you think there is a time frame that investors can look towards?
It's just not appropriate for me to forecast on that. Again, the best, a very good way to get a viewpoint on it is to go to the ABC, go to Wendy Harmer's program and listen to the interview.